explain a little bit. Normally we have work sessions where we try to inform the board of issues. But since seems to be a sensitive issue, we've decided to have this work session as a special meeting in front of the folks here. No decision will be made today. No comments other than questions of the board of the presenter. This is a public presentation that will be made as a beginning in the process to understand what is involved should we determine to go ahead in the future. Now, having said all that, is Mark here somewhere? Mark, would you care to introduce our speaker for the presentation?
Hello, Mark Eisenberg, Director of the St. County Wastewater Management System. I'm here to present the first speaker of many. The other ones have not been scheduled yet. But we went with Mike Shelton from DEQ. In 1998, he graduated from Petoskey High School. In 2004, he graduated from Grand Valley State University with a Bachelor's of Science in Geology. And in 2006, he started working for DEQ in the Office of Oil and Gas and Minerals, which used to be called the Geological Survey Department Division. 2007 he married, and in 2010 he was blessed with a child. So I asked you guys to give him the opportunity to do his presentation, and then to lead back to you, Commissioner. Thank you.
Thank you.
Mike.
Hello, Mike Shelton, DEQ employee.
Get everybody here up here.
Is this on? Can you hear me?
That's
Is that better?
You're too tall. Get bent.
Is this the... All right, is that better? Everybody can hear me then? Okay. How about if I stand like this? No? Okay. All right. So my name is Mike Shelton with the Office of Oil, Gas, and Minerals with the Department of Environmental Quality. I was asked to come here to kind of go over the history of the regulating industry, the Office of Oil, Gas, and Minerals, formerly known as the Office of Geological Survey, formerly known as the Department of Conservation, formerly known, it's been changed quite a few times. And then also to kind of go over a hot topic right now of hydraulic fracturing and Muskegon County, I guess, in reference. As I said, not pro-oil, not anti-oil. I just regulate them, so go ahead and point it at that there. Just a quick kind of outline, introduction to the Office of Oil, Gas, and Minerals. Quick geology of Muskegon. Kind of the information of what hydraulic fracturing is. Collingwood Utica development, which really brought this hot topic to Michigan. The water withdrawal assessment tool that's used to make sure nobody's water wells go dry. And then kind of looking forward in summary. The Office of Oil, Gas, and Minerals role is basically to oversee oil and gas drilling operations, exploration, development from basically cradle to grave. We go over every aspect from permitting to plugging to final site restoration. It starts, obviously we don't, it's I guess cradle because we're not there at conception, given that the oil and gas industries, if they share anything, information with us, Freedom of Information Acts can be filed and all that information becomes public knowledge. Many oil and gas industries spend lots of money to get the data first, so obviously they're not going to tell us what their plans are until they apply for a permit application, which under business ideas I completely understand. We go over your drilling completion, the overall casing program, I mean the whole kit and caboodle. I guess those would be the notes one. The permitting and surface location goes on zoning issues, setback distances, concerns of environmentally sensitive areas to historically protected areas. There's a lot that actually goes into the overall setup of where a well can actually be. There has been also times when isolation distances or just general, if there's other available locations for a well or a company to drill, they have been required to move or be posted or repositioned where they want to do the wellhead for either citizen benefit or whatever. I mean, there are situations along those lines. The casing and sealing program is something that is taken very seriously in Michigan. Our predecessors were smart enough to realize fresh water is required for life. So what they end up doing is, when it is required that all potable water sources, freshwater aquifers, are cased behind cement and casing, which includes 100 feet into competent bedrock. I have locations where, locations where the bedrock below the freshwater aquifer is not competent, so the companies have to actually set their surface casings deeper on that. The thing about Michigan is we have very phenomenal geology, and it can fluctuate from one spot to the next. Shoot, Muskegon County, I'll go over some of the areas, and it changes from east to west, north to south. So each site is extremely specific, and there's a lot of situations that are taken in concern. You can also see on here the sealing, blowout prevention, and please do not associate the Gulf disaster with blowout preventers. That was just a bad situation. Blowout preventer 5,000 feet below the surface of water compared to a blowout preventer that would be used on a land-based drilling system are completely different. I've been on locations when a well has taken a kit, the rig has shaken, the BOP has worked. There's some sound sciences and practices behind Michigan drilling and everything. Drilling and completion, field staff are on site, not 24/7, not even every day. We don't have enough staff to have somebody sit on every single well, every single second of every single minute. And I have yet to meet a citizen that's willing to pay that much money to have somebody sit on every single well, every single minute. People say it, but people don't pass millages. So reserve pits have to have required liners to ensure that there's no impact to the groundwater. Surface casing, here's a little animation of how it works. Your conductor pipe is basically just a pipe that's driven into the ground at the beginning, just to give a well a starting point. With our glacial drift, the sand, rock, and stones that's underneath our feet, it gives a lot of fluctuation. It's an unconsolidated barrier. So you start drilling, could slough in on you. The conductor pipe's just basically driven in to give you a starting point to keep the well straight, and then to continue from there. Your surface casing is going to fluctuate depths. For me, up in Mecosta County, I've had them up to 1,000 feet deep. In other counties, surface casing has to go shallower or even deeper, depending on where the potable freshwater aquifer is. From that, you have to go 100 feet below that base of the freshwater at minimum. Like I was saying, some of them I've had 150, 200, etc. if the bedrock is not an actual competent bedrock. The casing pipe is then, after the hole is drilled to the intended depth, casing is run and is cemented back to surface, and then there is a wait time to ensure that the cement reaches a proper compressive strength and cures properly before they can even drill out of that one. From there, they would then install the intermediate casing depending on the depth of the well, and what this would end up doing is then drilling down, running intermediate casing, and cementing back up. Now on horizontal wells, since that's a hot topic, I'm kind of talking about these right now. Your horizontal wells have a completely different system to them as compared to your vertical wells. Vertical wells would still use your production casing, cement it up to an X amount of point. And that's the same thing on your horizontal wells. Your production records, you'll notice there's a little bit of a TD vertical hole, that means total depth vertical hole. So what we're showing is the conductor pipe, base of surface casing, base of intermediate casing. I put in here a kick point. It's something that's used that some people don't understand. All that is basically everything up to that kick point is basically set as exactly the same as a vertical well. But from here, they'll actually use a tool called a mud monitoring while drilling, a MWD bit. And what that does is that actually monitors the angle of the bit so they know where it's drilling and where it's going. From there, they'll end up going out through here to whatever their intended depth is that fluctuates from one well to the next, and run their production pipe and cement it back. The state of Michigan has constantly updated their rules and regulations through either supervisors, instructors' orders, requirements, etc. Permit requirements on these long horizontal hydraulic, or just horizontal wells in general, are now required to cement 1,000 feet above the kick point just to ensure that there's actual more competency to that well. The reason why you have this vertical point shown in this slide here is many companies, before they even go into the horizontal system, they like to drill a vertical well and actually core that formation that they're looking at in order to get more scientific data of should we even spend the money to go out horizontally. Just because they permitted a well doesn't mean that they're going to go out horizontally and hydraulic fracture. In fact, many wells aren't even hydraulically fractured, they're just regular wells that are drilled to a formation to try to find oil and gas. We go over production. They cannot create a production facility without DEQ's approval. Secondary containment is required under every single system. Many ones that might have H2S systems or H2S gas associated with it are required to have monitoring equipment installed. Recently there was one that had a fatal flaw in the monitoring system, and I believe that there's going to be some situations that require more updating of monitoring to ensure the equipment works. But there's setback distances depending on the wells. H2S wells have certain defining characteristics to it, class 4 to class 1. Class 1 being the most severe, class 4 being there's H2S present, but it doesn't create a adverse effect to health.
Yeah, what does that mean?
Well, you wouldn't die if you smelled it.
But you die if you drink it.
H2S is gas, actually.
I'm talking about the water. The gas that goes into the water.
Hang on, there are people here that have some questions. I understand your guys' concerns. I seriously do. And we'll talk about those there. But with that, you go in through your activities, your production equipment, to see how things look. Plugging in final site restoration. People need to be aware that if you have a fancy tree you like, or there's a hill or something, the company is only required to establish a location so that there's no erosional issues, things along those lines. If you have a nice wooded area, you're going to end up having a 200 by 200, 300 by 300, or etc. open grassland when you get to the end of it. There are ways that people can negotiate, etc. on the afterwards, but at this point the state looks for just site restoration to be stabilized, no erosional issues, and no environmental concerns left to it. Michigan Basin, here's a quick little geology on it. Your Michigan Basin, this is a cross section, so you have your line from the beginning up in the northwest area to the southeast. And what it's showing you is the structures underneath Michigan of the different ages of rock, etc. You're at the Antrim Shale, which has actually been produced quite a lot up in the northern Michigan area and has had a lot of hydraulic fracturing done to it. It's relatively shallow. You have your Niagara and Utica Collingwood, which is actually a really high. The Utica is really sought after in eastern Ohio. And there's a lot of different varying rock components to it. Yes?
This presentation is to the board, not to the audience.
Oh, okay.
And,
my apologies.
I would caution any members of the audience not to have any outbursts, or you'll be asked to leave. This is your vision.
Okay, my apologies. So the Michigan Basin geology shows here, we kind of have like a bunch of cereal bowls stacked inside of each other. Different age rocks layers are defined in here through our stratigraphic column, through multiple holes that have been drilled through Michigan's history. It's been over 60,000 wells that have been permitted and drilled. With Muskegon County, I've gotten a couple of identifying layers up here that will show you the different formation tops. Our base of drift, oh, that's Utica County. Our base of drift is the rock and sand and gravel that's right underneath our feet. For Muskegon County, your base of drift is roughly 190 feet to, I think, about 400, 600 in some areas. So it really fluctuates from east to west and north to south. Our glacial systems that deposited it here have different areas of scours and different areas of deposits. So then you get into your Berea zone, which was highly played in the eastern portion of Muskegon County, but that also fluctuates from 1,000 to about 1,100 feet. In your Antrim Formation, which has been highly played up in the northern Michigan Peninsula, or lower northern Michigan, lower, you know what I'm saying, the Antrim up there, 1530 to 1670. The one thing about the Antrim in this area is it's not highly fractured or has natural fractures to it like the northern Michigan area, and science is still yet to determine why the Antrim is so different from up north as it is compared to down here. Your Traverse Formation is where the Traverse and Dundee is where a majority of Muskegon's play is, and especially around the town of Muskegon and here. thousands of wells were drilled in Muskegon to the Traverse Formation in Dundee for oil production in the late 1920s, 1927, I believe it was discovered. Prior to that, actually, because permits started in 1927. But through late 1920s and 1930s, Muskegon was highly drilled into the Traverse and Dundee for oil and gas. The Detroit River, 2200, A2A1 has got some interesting plays over on the east side of the state. That's a potential target. Your Niagaran has, there's Niagaran wells up in the northern part of Muskegon, 3600, 3700. The odd thing is the Utica and Collingwood. Collingwood is not existent here. The Utica, Trenton, and PDC, I could not locate wells that had actually gone that deep to give us formation tops to them. The Utica, we'll get to that, I guess. Here's the map. We have a GeoWeb face option that you can use on the Office of Oil, Gas, and Minerals webpage. You can get all sorts of information, geology, well information, water quality data. It's really quite a system. But what this is showing you here is we've got Muskegon County, and it's showing you all these different subcrops. Now, subcrops, not like an outcrop where a rock is exposed. It's a subcrop. It's actually below your base of drift. So, well, these you can see, you have a big change from your Jurassic red beds on the far right all the way over to the cold water sandstone, or cold water shale, which is this little green spot at the bottom and the top of Muskegon. The Marshall sandstone tends to be your base of your subcropping formation more on this western side, which is actually can be considered a potable water source, so therefore it increases the depth of surface casing. I like that, it gives it a benefit. The Muskegon has been discovered in the late 1920s. Many of them were by surface seeps, so actual oil leaking to the surface, and company wildcatters would then drill wells to find it. Other ones were by what's known as closeology, just they hit a well there, I'm going to go drill one here. Permit number 37, which was permitted in 1928, is still producing today. World War II influenced many of the wells to be plugged prior to their theoretical time due to the need for steel and casing for the war efforts. And so far, as I was saying, the formations of most play were Berea in the late 30s, 40s, Traverse Formation in Dundee, and the Niagara. So here's just an overshot of Muskegon. You can see all these little red and black dots. Those are oil wells. Very few of those are producing anymore. I think there's a total of 14 in the Muskegon area that are still producing. And you can even see there was 2 that were drilled to the Berea Formation in the wastewater treatment pond. Of course, this was before wastewater treatment was there. So what is hydraulic fracturing? This is the hot topic in the state. There's a lot of misinformation out there. There's also a lot of truth out there. And you have to look at your sites and sources for it. Hydraulic fracturing is only a completion technique that is used on wells, and only some wells. It's not used on every single well, and it's only usually used on tight shale formations. Some companies, I'm learning now, are kind of looking at the tighter carbonate formations that most of Michigan has below it. These tighter carbonate formations, though, can have a situation where it might be tight in one spot, but then as you fracture it, you could get into high porosity or permeability, just basically words that mean the ability of stuff to flow. Most of the formations that they look at are relatively deep, tight shales, and we went over some of those depths to the formations. But basically what it is, if anybody's read it, it's a procedure to complete some oil and natural gas wells, pumped water at high pressure to create fractures in a rock that may not already exist. Also to possibly open up pre-existing fractures. Your proppants, usually silica sand, are added, plus a little industry cocktail of chemicals, which can be hazardous to the health, which has been shown, so there's no reason to hide that. But most of it's not as bad as the oil and gas chemicals anyway. The history of hydraulic fracturing has been around since 1947 is the first one on record. It's been around since 1952 in Michigan. The nice thing, Michigan has been extremely lucky, is we had vertical fractured wells in the Antrim Formation to actually learn and grow with small water withdrawal quantities, smaller uses of chemicals and sands, to kind of figure out how the system works and what the actual systems are. Over the 60 years, though, rock mechanics, engineering, modeling, things along those lines have given a lot more information to it. But as we all have seen in the news, some states have been sideswiped by not being prepared for the situation or having proper rules or regulations in location. Hydraulic fracturing in Michigan, we have the rules and regulations are basically set up on a system of protecting fresh water and ensuring that public health is maintained. That's the only reason the Department of Environmental Quality is really around, is to ensure that things are safe. Water storage, spillage, cleanup, everything is required to be notified to the state representative, whoever's location it might be, which would also be the state representative on location at the same time.
Why is it exempt from the EPA then?
Remember
The
this
Safe
area?
Water Drinking Act.
Separately, please.
The Safe Water Drinking Act, the exemption of that, I actually don't know, I understand it's over here, but there is concerns in the crowd. I don't know what federal regulations are for reasons or why they were proposed or anything, but I had nothing to do with them, so my apologies. I can't actually answer that question for you. The chemicals, oh sorry, yep. The chemicals used, MSDS are required to be on location, but due to federal regulations which require secrecy behind them, the state cannot have them in our possession because then it'd be a Freedom of Information Act, which violates the federal law, and the companies do not have to give them unless there's a spill. The nice thing is at least they're there. If something were to happen, we would be able to know what to chase and go after and ensure people were safe. You don't want to get kicked out. Hang on real quick. The hydraulic fracturing in Michigan, as I said, it's been around since 1952. It started in Elk Township in the Berea Formation. Not a formation to start hydraulic fracturing in, given that it is a very porous formation in some areas, so not sure why they tried that, but since then over 12,000 wells have been done safely with no impact to groundwater surfaces or public's health. But that doesn't mean that you throw caution to the wind. There's still issues. Most of these wells, as I said, were small scale. 40,000 to 100,000 gallons used for it per fracturing stage. These larger scaled ones, 6.7 million gallons can be used. That's a lot of water to be using to get into these formations. But with that, we use a lot of things to ensure that nobody's wells go dry, there's no issues, things along those lines. I can understand the concerns. There's a lot of concern out there. This is a hydraulic fracturing pad. It's been indicated that we focus on this too much, but a lot of times to landowners, this is something that is very important. Your normal drilling well pad is around 200 by 200 to 300 by 300. Your hydraulic fracturing pad can be much, much greater than this. On the very top of it, I'm not sure if you can all see that little white school bus. That's a full-size school bus, so you can give you an idea of how big this is. I've identified many of the areas on the pad of what's going on. Your freshwater pit, there can be no chemicals or anything added to that. That is solely just a staging area for fresh water to be pumped in and used for this, because you have to shove a lot of water, a lot of sand, a lot of chemicals. Well, they say it's less than 0.5% of the total concoction, but 0.5% of 6.7 million gallons is still a lot of chemicals to think about. Your proppant, which is the sand that's used to open it up, your freshwater tanks, and the wellhead's located conveniently kind of in the center there. There's a lot of common issues that arise from this. Your migration of fracture fluids, chemicals, why aren't they identified? Why are some, why aren't others? Your flowback water. There's been a lot of situations in other states where flowback water has caused a lot of problems. You cannot put this stuff into sanitary cleaning areas. You cannot use this stuff in other things. It's not meant for it. The stuff has to be disposed of downhole in a properly sealed, regulated disposal well in order to take care of it. There's companies that are right now trying to develop green technologies to increase hydraulic fracturing. There's also companies that are trying to create recycling methods for it. It doesn't exist right now. So that water, if they use it, they've got to dispose of it, and it's down in some formation that's pre-approved by regulations, the EPA, etc. Surface spills. Big issue of concern. You hear about all these trucks coming in with a lot of chemicals. That's something to be concerned about. All the locations are covered with secondary containment. They have to have liners under them. If spills happen, they have to be immediately cleaned up. And I know a lot of people say, well, you're not there all the time. How do you know? Well, if you dig up one spot and you have a new sand or soils kind of put onto it, you can usually identify something happened. I'm not going to lie, not there all the time. Could things happen? Yes. Do I think the rules and regulations? I don't think. I know the rules and regulations are quality and have been proven, and I believe with the updates they can be proven as well too. Water use. A lot of people get nervous. 6.7 million gallons being used. It's a lot of water. It's a one-time use, and then they're done. But then it's disposed of. People get upset that 6.7 million gallons may be disposed of and not be able ever to be able to reuse again. It's, in comparison, New York City uses 6.7 million gallons in 10 seconds or less. It's about the size of 10 Olympic swimming pools. And to give you an idea of what 6.7 million, that's a big number. Gas and water wells, that's one of the main issues that they worry about. Michigan has natural gas in water wells. It's something that's been around. We have this interesting geology where we have subcropping formations that have natural gas, oil, etc. already in them. So with these subcropping formations, you have natural gas and oil that actually release into the groundwater table. All of these sites and confirmed sites that we have so far in Michigan have been prior to oil and gas activity. I do not know, I'm not familiar with Pennsylvania's rules and regulations or their geology as well. All these other states that have had issues of possible gas contamination. But I do know that a lot of them also have subcropping formations that have oil and gas that may be infiltrating the water table. I cannot say that is 100% sure though. Frac fluids, there's a lot of things that have been released out there about what they are. Now these are just going to be general names and information. They're not going to give their secretive, federally protected formulas. That's something that they have to have on location that we can identify if there is a release. But it is not something that we have because federal law requires the privacy. This is small, no one can read it. Chesapeake Energy has released their frac fluids that they use. Anybody can go to their Chesapeake Energy website and look them up. Many other companies are starting to do that as well, realizing the social outcry for obvious reasons. Flowback water. Flowback water has to be contained. It cannot come in contact with the ground. It cannot go into the reserve pit. It cannot go into the freshwater pit. It has to be contained in steel tanks. As you see here, these frac tanks, it has to be on secondary liners, and it has to be monitored and disposed of properly in a proper disposal well. That is all set up prior to approving the application to ensure that there is safety and that there is no possible no probable path for contamination to reach the groundwater. Hydraulic fracturing, surface spill prevention, it's a lot of trucks, it's a lot of traffic, it's a lot of mess, it's a lot of gross. There is a lot of, everything has to be on liners, everything has to be understood and connected. Patches and liners or ribs have to be repaired instantly. That's usually when we go out there. If there's something you find, you take care of it, clean up, remove the soils. If you find anything contaminated, companies have to take analytical data ensuring that there is a clean closure to it. They can't just willy-nilly say it's clean. This is kind of showing you, the upper right pictures really kind of puts it into perspective though, trucks of chemicals. The Collingwood Shale, this is the one that's really kind of lit this off. A couple of companies came in and did long horizontal hydraulic fracturing of the Collingwood Shale. It's a deep formation. This is our isopack. What that means is it's a thickness. Green is thin, red and pink are thicker. This is where the Collingwood Shale is. This is what a lot of the companies are interested right now. And as you can see, it's not in Muskegon. However, there are other shales in Muskegon that could potentially be targets, like the Utica. It's got a really low organic component and really low gas quantity. It's nothing like the Ohio Utica, but 5 years, 100 years, 500 years from now, there could be another energy crisis. It could be a very useful source to tap into. The Antrim Shale, very similar quantities to the upper north area and the northern lower peninsula that has been produced since the mid-70s. However, there's no naturally occurring fractures. Because of the shallow depth, it appears that most companies are not able to get in and do a horizontal well into it due to DEQs, surface casing issues, and then also intermediate casing rules for those long horizontals. Could technology develop eventually that would allow that? Yes, I can't say no to that. The current Collingwood activity is all up north. You've got a lot in Kalkaska and Sheboygan counties. There has actually been more permits issued and more pending applications. I forgot to update that, my apologies. I believe it's about 28 issued permits, and I think we're up to 26 pending applications at this point for that calendar review. One thing about the natural gas industry is that a lot of them, horizontal drilling rates and overall exploration has decreased dramatically due to the bottoming out of the price of natural gas. Oil is where most companies are now looking at, $80, $100 a barrel. You can make your money back relatively quick on it. The depressing thing is with natural gas being at such a low situation, green technologies are really suffering on benefiting of development. So as I was saying, the Utica and Collingwood geology. The Collingwood is not actually here in Muskegon. It's actually not a shale. It's a shaly limestone. But the Utica is a true shale. So it's compacted, it's got bedding planes, development, and then there's a really low organic component to it. Low organic components indicate low gas quantities, low oil quantities. Basically, the less organic material you have, the less that can decompose and hopefully become one of those, or maybe become one of those. Your Collingwood is a fine-grained limestone interbedded with the shaly limestone layers of that upper Trenton Black River formation. The Trenton Black River is what's the big play right now over in Calhoun, Jackson, Runaway, I'm missing a county. Anyways, over there. And that is, they're finding wells that pay 100 to 200 barrels of oil a day. It was a big play on the Albion Scipio trend in the late 70s. They believed it was dead, and now all these companies with newer technologies, 3D seismic, are able to find new pockets of producing oil. But by that, the Collingwood, as you can see, 6.6% by weight from your organic content, which is the maximum, compared to your 1.3%, you can see the huge difference there of why one would be more exciting to oil and gas companies as the other. It's a very complicated system of setting up these from one place to the next because of our varying geology, and then also because of different rock beds and subcropping. So as a case in point, your Kalkaska and Saukey counties, conductor pipe to 100, your surface casing is 704 feet, and that's the cold water shale. Around here, the cold water shale is about 700 to 800 feet. So about the same in theory. So I guess that's a horrible example. Your intermediate casing to 5083 in the Bass Islands, and then your production casing, you can see on the one of theirs is 11,133 total feet of drilling. True vertical depth of only 8,900 feet. So the formations that they're interested in, possibly hydraulic fracturing, are extremely deep, well over a mile, almost to 2 from the surface. But so the fracturing down here would not be an area of concern. It's what could possibly happen uphole or up the surface, or whatever the casing program might be. But the same idea, the same formation they're looking at in Sheboygan County, there's a huge difference in depth. You go from 8,300 feet to 4,100 feet for a true vertical depth. So you have different casing systems. You have a contingency string because up north there is actually soluble bedrock. If they start to drill through there, you're going to make a cavern. And you try to fill that cavern with cement, it's going to be tough. So with this, they go down to 318 of the Bell Shale, competent bedrock, seal that off, and then do your actual surface casing is then to the Bass Islands, which is where the original one, the intermediate casing was that I showed. Spacing issues always come into play. Your standard wells are 40 acres. You have your 80 acres for your Niagara or deeper, stand-up or lay-down 80 acres. Then your Pierre Duchesne formations, which I was unable to find any wells in Muskegon to, would be a 640-acre spacing, 1 square mile. And that's because of the depth and the data that we have on it shows that you could adequately drain a 1 square mile area with one well. The Collingwood, however, is an issue. We don't have enough data on it to understand what is the drainage, what would be good. We have companies that have applied for 80 acres. We have companies that have applied for 640. And that's something that is still being ruled on and deciphered by people up the chain from me. Large volume withdrawals is what I was talking about. Your State Pioneer, 6.7 million gallons was used, and that's over 15 stages. In the hydraulic fracturing process, they would use, you would drill your well, properly case and seal it, and then as you go in, you would perforate and fracture in separate zones. That's the stages that it's referring to. So with that, almost 500,000 gallons per stage to complete each one of those. Now this is all overseen, monitored, and they cannot even start this without going through the permit process that we oversee to ensure that there will be no impact to other people's surrounding water wells. But this is to give you kind of an idea. Your Antrim Shale, 40,000 to 100,000 gallons. Big magnitude difference there. 3 to 4 stages, and those are mostly vertical wells. So vertical to horizontal, big difference, but the horizontal ones are actually much deeper and a lot less surface impact, which is something I see a benefit to, but there's ups and downs to both sides. Your State Pioneer well, you know, you have that large hydraulic fracturing pad, but that's one well for like a square mile area. Your Antrim shales, that'd be one well for every 40. And there's exceptions that you can be granted if it's proven to have one every less than that, if it's a process that confining setback layers and areas of, you know, environmental concern might push those things closer to each other. So how much is 6.7 million gallons, 3/8 of an inch over 1 square mile, 10 Olympic pools. It says a golf course uses it in roughly 33 days, but I don't know any golf course that's that fancy. Your supervisor of well instructions, there has been updates as of 2011 and still one's processing, which would then decrease the amount of use, what has to be regulated, what has to be watched. They do have to report their water withdrawal to us. They do have to report the overall system. This also sets up a system where any public well or private well within a quarter of a mile from the well site has to have a monitoring well in between it. That monitoring well is going to be monitored on a daily basis. If that monitoring well fluctuates, if that water level drops, the company ceases every operation that they're doing. They have to. They have to wait till the water level rebalances to see if they impacted that aquifer. That way, we've heard the horror stories. Whether they're true or not, I don't know, but it's too much to be concerned about. If someone's water well goes dry, they have no water. With this in place, this ensures that people are not going to end up losing their water well. The water withdrawal assessment tool also helps to know if they can do a withdrawal in one area or the next. Your completion, so you have your monitoring well system in there. The freshwater pit cannot create a hazard. Hazard is defined as, I forget offhand, but basically so nobody dies in it. So basically the freshwater pit is open, they can't put any chemicals into it. They have to flag it off, fence it off so no woodland creatures or etc., small children, whatever might go into it. Monitor and record injection pressures at all time. Your casing programs have to be, the casing that they have to use on these, because you can have wells that use 8,000 to 10,000 pounds of pressure to force that stuff into the area. You have to have casing that is well over that burst ratio. Reporting material, MSDS sheets are on site. Yes, they are not reported to us unless there is a spill. That is federal regulations. Service company records are all monitored and reviewed to ensure that everything is done properly. Plus, while we're out there, if there's any discrepancies to it, your annular pressures are also monitored the entire time that they are going through the fracking process, the hydraulic fracking process. This is ensuring that there is no migration or communication outside of that production casing through the thousands of feet cement up into the annulus, up to the surface. And then also the total volume of flowback has to be monitored. The 6.7 million gallons of the flowback fluids, we're averaging around 25 to 35%. So that's a lot more that's stuck down in formation, 6,000, 4,000 feet, depending on the formation they're going to. That will all be produced, well, hopefully produced during the life of the well. Otherwise, it could end up remaining down there. So here's a thing I was talking about with the aquifer monitoring. Looks like a third grader put it together, but you have your drilling rig on the right side, the water supply well, which they will be doing the withdrawal for the hydraulic fracturing, and then you have this residential well that is within 13 to 120 feet, quarter mile. You have the monitoring well in between there, so as they start the process of withdrawing the fluids, that monitoring well is monitored. If it drops, stop, just stop. Don't do what you're doing, let's see what we're doing. And then you watch it, make sure it's going. If it shows that there is communication with it, and that's going to be something that could impact somebody else, that withdrawal is kiboshed, and they'd end up having to find another source to get the water for it. Just because we would deny them of being able to put in a withdrawal water well, does not mean that we can deny them drilling of the well. There are many companies that make their livelihood off of selling water, etc. They could end up going to a potable well source or a municipal source to get their water to end up doing it. It's a lot of trucking, and the companies don't really like to do that much. Your recent legislations, these are things that define your adverse resource impact, your stream's ability to support characteristic fish populations. So the most susceptible organisms are the ones that would be monitored to ensure that there's no adverse resource impact. Large quantity withdrawals, 100,000 gallons per day. That's basically due to it came into place because of irrigation systems. But this actually works out great for us because the same tool that every farmer has to go through that's running irrigation systems is basically the same tool that we're running through here to ensure that nobody's going to be impacted by the water withdrawal. The water withdrawal assessment tool is something that's been put together. It's a beta version that goes over all of Michigan's quaternary geology, water resources, soil characteristics, etc. that plays into it for the withdrawal spots. Basically what it works off is groundwater feeds streams which support fish. If you take away the water, where's the stream? Gone. Where's the fish? Gone. So you have to make sure that you continue to have a good water system with this. As you go through there, distance does matter from those trout streams or et cetera that might be part of the database. Even just your normal little creeks. The farther away you are, the less likely you are going to impact it. But then also your soil systems. If it's more clay, water doesn't move through clay that well. If it's more sandy, water really moves real quickly through it. And so those are things to take in consideration as they're running this monitoring system. And on that, they all have to give us the data to crunch it through so we can recreate their data to show that it would be possible to be here. And this also takes into effect, this is just basically showing you, most people know seasonal changes of water systems, but this is just to show you it does matter also when you're going to be doing it. You know, we have a lot more water in March and April, and that's probably because of snow melt. Not this year so much, but it is calculated due to seasonal systems that can influence the overall idea. Your water withdrawal screening results, so A, proceed. Now that doesn't mean that we get the packet and we just say, go on your way. We would then take that stuff, re-enter it, go through the whole system and ensure that it's actually okay. Your B, C's, and D's would then cause red flags to pop up. Still the same thing, we go through the whole thing to find out about it, to make sure that it's actually going to be okay. Now, if you get into your D's, there is an adverse resource impact. You cannot proceed no matter what it is. The odd thing is that they can petition to have a fisheries or biologist or somebody from our water division that would actually go out and assess that location to ensure that it would cause an adverse resource impact. We've had some that have actually been turned over by the fisheries and biologists or the stream morphology people. But we've had most of them that have been denied from what I've heard, and then they've looked for another source for the water. So water withdrawal analysis is for high volume hydraulic fracturing is what we use it for. Anything that's over 100,000 gallons per day. Under no circumstances will water withdrawals that are determined to create an actual ARA be approved. And that's the pressing thing. The actual is when we actually get somebody who is schooled in that area of knowledge to actually determine the site, the geology, the soils, etc., to ensure that it's actually not able to go ahead. Supervisor's instructions prevents adverse resource impact. A lot of looking forward stuff. There's research that's out there continuously. A lot of universities, the EPA, USGS. This is a hot topic. Everybody's looking into it. Data's slow to come because it's hard to get data from drilling a well. When you're thousands of feet down below, you can't exactly monitor what's going on down there. With angular pressures, you use everything that you can possibly use to keep an eye on it. Some companies have actually gone as far as to get seismic systems out to ensure where those fractures are actually happening. At this point, though, it's still under review to see it. And the way it's looking is it's really a site-by-site system. There's too many locations that have had issues, and from what it looks like from originally, and I can't say yes or no, it's really horrible rules, regulations, and casing programs. Case of EPA's reports on Wyoming, they had an 800-foot freshwater aquifer, and they ran 500 feet of surface casing. How many feet are open to be contaminated? 300. Does that make sense? No. So with that, if you go below it and make sure that you're not actually going to impact the fresh water and seal it off with proper casing strength, cementing practices, etc., you can protect that fresh water. Another state, I believe Pennsylvania and Wyoming, both have situations where the underlying rock formation is an oil and gas bearing formation. They allowed them to drill in and hydrofrack right underneath the freshwater aquifer. What could happen to that freshwater aquifer? Become contaminated. There needs to be scientific information before approving for a company to do that, and that's what the DEQ's basis set on for their permitting application process, to ensure that there is not going to be any impacts to public health or environmental health. I have resources listed up here for places to go for information. One of the good ones, the Michigan State University Extension Oil and Gas Portal. Just type that into any search engine, and I am under the impression that it's an unbiased opinion on things. Other people have varying opinions, and that's the nice thing about the United States. And looking at the EPA to see if there's anything that's coming up. The reports are supposed to be due out in 2015, so we'll probably see them in 2020 or something else, but that's what can happen sometimes. I was given a list of questions that have been submitted to go over. Some people had some questions. Well, I guess first, do you guys have any questions?
Well, I guess I'd like to limit questions to the board. Questions from the board.
Yeah, you know, we don't often get an audience this size here. So it's good that the community's coming out to hear it, but during your presentation, and maybe I missed it because of all the industry speak, but I didn't hear one thing about how would this benefit our county at all.
That's a very good point. And
Anyone asking to leave? Clap, just go out in the hall.
And there was one of them, while I was looking at your presentation, one of the names popped up that was kind of a concern to me, and that was Halliburton. And we know their history. So how would this fracturing benefit our people in this county?
I guess the first thing is I'm not an oil and gas representative, so I couldn't give you the song and dance about how it could. I guess the one thing is landowners could have the option for royalty payments. I mean, I can't give you the ups and downs to it. Possibly less expensive natural gas energies, etc. I mean, that's all I can see out of it. Less surface impact for one well on some of them, but yet then you have the situation of which formation are they looking at, and I don't. I mean, I understand your concern on that, and as a commissioner, you should be looking into that, but that's not. I'm not here to sell you yes, and I'm not here to sell you no. I'm just here to tell you that we regulate it, and that's my job.
The genesis of this, I think, needs some explanation, and that is that we started several years ago to look at wind energy on the wastewater site as a means of reducing the costs for the people who provide the wastewater and water. As part of this, with the recent emphasis on oil and gas exploration, I requested that we get some information on the possibility of oil and gas, which, as I understand it, there's a large pocket under the state of Michigan that we might be looking at as far as the wastewater site is concerned. There have been no conclusions, and no one has taken a position as to yes, no, or maybe. This was strictly to receive information, and I appreciate the fact that this group has come together to gather information. I think it's our responsibility as responsible governing unit to examine all aspects for that. And that's the reason that this is being undertaken.
Jim?
You know, this need not be adversary. I see this as an opportunity to learn. As we move forward, these options are going to be before us again. I can recall back in 1985, oil and gas leases were going through the county, And I think I'm leaving here much better educated as what to watch for. And I think Mark has said there's going to be a series of informational things so we can do our jobs better and protect our environment. But, you know, we have to look. Nuclear energy has its downside. We have a lot of it. I think we need to be aware first of what are the downfalls so we can weigh those against how can it work. And I hate to see it be adversary out here. I think we're trying to do our job better by gathering this information. And thank you, sir. That was very educational.
No, I appreciate you guys having this, and I think that's a great idea going forward to have it open to the public comment here, like you were saying.
I gathered back in the 30s they drilled a lot of wells here, and there's quite a few that have never been capped properly, and I gather they're leaking in townships right now. What assurances do we have that as these wells go dry and these companies go bankrupt or whatever, that you guys are making sure that these wells get capped properly so they do not pollute into the future?
Yes, definitely fantastic question. It's 1930s, 40s, 50s, the science at the time was pathetic by today's standards. They would use trees and stones to throw down a well to plug it off. And the stuff that they cut up, they'd pour it back down because, hey, that's where it came from. But this is also the time when humans thought, hey, it came from the earth, let's just let it flow on the earth because everything's going to be fine. But it's not. That's not the way it is. Presently, the human race, the only way we seem to go forward is if we lose and make big mistakes and learn from them. It's human nature, that's how it works. The rules and regulations in place today are completely up to scientific status. There's new scientific evidence that comes out all the time that is deciphered and I believe is concurrently being deciphered for rules and regulations in our environment. The wells are not plugged by they are plugged by the operators, but we write the plugging instructions. We decide where they need to plug, what they need to do. There's a lot of limits that are put in place to it. If there are, if they run an open hole completion, let's say, what that means is you have your production casing down to a certain point, and then they drill a little bit, a couple feet maybe more into the pay zone so that there's no obstruction for the fluids to come out. You'd end up having to do proper sealings for that, for pressure tested bridge plugs, squeeze jobs, it's all jargon, I'm sorry. Like if there's perforations in the casing, you'd have to do what's known as a cement retainer. You set that above it, and then you have to squeeze the cement through that cement retainer, which is a plug by itself, underneath and out into the formation to ensure that all those openings are actually closed. The plugs on certain formations that might have hydrocarbons to them or shows, each formation has to be properly cemented off. There's no brush and stone plugging anymore. It's Bible approved systems of plugging.
Is each well bonded or anything to make sure that it gets done?
Each well is bonded. There's different bonding systems. I am not an expert in that area. That's some people are not seeing, but each well has to be properly bonded. There's different. The deeper it is, the more bond basically is on it, because the more money it would cost the state if worst came to worst that we had to plug.
So it is ensured to be capped by us if no one else does it.
Yes.
Be the bond. Thank you.
Yep. Sorry.
Yeah, thank you very much for coming. I've got several questions, but I guess the main criteria that I'm trying to tie into this, I think John was talking about, and Commissioner Garzinski really kind of hit it. Stephen County still owns the rights to all their oil and minerals. Am I correct in that, Mr. Chairman? Mark? We have never sold our oil rights for those 11,000 acres.
Yeah.
And I believe that's the issue, because every once in a while we get them fast-talking salesmen that show up at the front steps and they want to buy that acreage. Most of the land all the way around the wastewater has probably, for the most part, succumbed to those sales tactics, and those oil rights are owned by somebody else. Now, once that happens, if an oil company wants to exercise their rights and they want to come and they want to operate on that property, depending on the negotiations of that particular individual and with whoever they sold it to.
You're applying the surrounding landowners that might have.
Around
Okay.
waste.
Yep.
Okay. Where are the local governments in the pecking order? And as drain commissioner, are you aware at all across the state, do the drain commissioners have any review in this relative to the districts that they may be trying to drill in? Is there an opportunity for local comment on this, or is it all handled above and it just happens and nobody can say anything about it?
Basically, the latter. Most of it does happen under Part 615. Everything's basically put underneath the Office of Oil, Gas, and Minerals for the oil and gas permitting and processing. The soil erosion and sedimentation, if they're building a drilling pad, and county road stuff would still have to go through the counties on notification and getting the dirt permit basically to build the drill pad from the county.
So access.
County roads would still have to, they have to be permitted, their overweight loads, et cetera, and that stuff. But the vast majority of it does fall under Part 615.
Part 615?
That's the oil and gas rules and regulations, basically.
Okay. One of the comments that you had in one of your slides was that any particular problems that occur on the site are covered under existing Part 201 criteria with the state of Michigan.
Yep.
Is your department at all looking at the number of changes that are going through and amendments to Part 201?
Yes, we have to. It's our job.
There's several of them that I would be a little bit concerned about.
There's always concerns when rules get changed.
Okay.
In general, though, it'd be cleanup criteria that are established by Part 201. The main things that are going through right now are the overall reporting, industry ideas of proven technologies to help remediate sites faster. There are some sites that can fall under monitoring with natural attenuation, but under all those sites, if there's a spill, if there's a plume, it has to be delineated. It has to be fully delineated so we know which properties may have been impacted. Past practices have created issues. There are plumes out there are problems out there from past practices. Future stuff is something that hopefully companies realize it costs a lot more to monitor a project than it does to just clean it up right off the bat.
Okay, my final question, we have not sold our oil rights, gas oil rights. Nobody has the right to come on the property and do that unless we give them that right.
Right.
As I understand. What about horizontal from outside the lease work?
Every acreage of minerals has to be leased in order for them to drill it. If you do not choose to lease your minerals, they cannot drill underneath it. The technology at hand shows where they are, where they're drilling, where that actual bottom hole location is. It's something that the companies want to know. If they don't know where it is, then they don't know where they're actually producing from. A lot of these wells are dependent on structures, traps, etc., that require a relatively accurate hole to get to in order to produce it. These 11,000 acres that the county owns and the mineral rights they own, they would not be able to actually enter and drill under those unless you had signed, the county itself had signed a lease for it. So I mean, you can't drill unless you have the mineral rights.
So the real issue for the full board and also for the public works board is if we are approached by someone to sell our rights, then we should be considering all of this information being listed.
There's a lot of information to consider. That's the nice thing about being the mineral right owner is you have the choice to say yes or no. If a company does not produce something that you're comfortable with, then you say no. If they produce something that you're comfortable with, then you say yes. However you decide to choose it, that is not my decision. That is not my way to influence. I'm just to give you information on the rules and regulations to it. There's many landowners that call me that will not lease it. That's the right. Now, one of the questions that comes up off of that is compulsory pooling, though. There is a rule in the state of Michigan, a law, that if somebody is holding out, they can be forced pooled into the lease. Now, you have 11,000 acres. That won't happen. This isn't generally the people that might have less acreage, 1.13 I saw in one situation, depending on the setup of it. There's a misconception that if you own the majority of the acreage, you cannot be compulsory pooled. If a company shows enough effort and enough decision, you have to go through a hearing in order for the supervisor to approve it. The supervisor has denied compulsory pooling because the company said, oh, we've done a lot. The landowner showed up and said, they've never even talked to us. We've had it where the company has gone there for years and years and years trying to get a lease, and then this person's holding out on a small amount, and they were compulsory pooling. Now, compulsory pooling is not the end-all situation. You do not have to pay anything, and you are not charged anything. You're given the state's contract. It's a non-developmental contract, so they can't develop on your property without a secondary lease to you if you so chose to give them access for roads or for pipelines. But it is a situation where you would end up being forced pooled your acreage, or whatever size you have would be pooled into that drilling unit, 40 acre, 80 acre, 160, 640, however it works out. But then you do not pay anything. All you do is you get the limited royalty. The state has non-developmental clause in the way the state's lease is written. So they do take parts of the payment out until your percentage is paid off. That's the way the state's is written. But then that way, the people who don't want anything to do with it aren't forced to have property, drilling on their land. And it's the way to make sure that the well spacings don't impact the environment too much or get off pace. If a well finds a well, they drill and find a location, that's set spacing. The next well in that 40 acre has to be in that same quadrant, that same 40 acres, and that is a mirror image all the way through the field. You can apply for spacing exemptions due to wetlands, waterways, a pond in the way. There was one, it was a giant church. It's kind of hard to move a church to have somebody drill a well and they end up moving it to another location. There's a lot of situations where that can happen, but with the 11,000, you would not, I don't see how you could be compulsory.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Yes, Mike, since we've been in this business since 1952, we should have quite a bit of history with that. So have we experienced any problems with accidents because of the flow back, because it cannot go into the ground?
Yeah, of the 12,000 wells that I've looked into and many other people in Lansing have looked to, there has not been any impacts to environment, public health, or major incidents to it. If there were surface spills or something that did occur, it would have been completely cleaned up and verified that there was no contamination left to it. As I was saying, these 12,000 wells were the relatively shallow ones in the Antrim formation up north, the majority of them, smaller scale, but in that situation, I mean, if there's any release or spills, they are cleaned up.
Thank you. I keep hearing rules and regulations. I guess that's my only concern, because the other thing I hear out Lansing all the time is we have too many regulations. And, I think, if it's safe, it's great, but if they remove the regulations, then it's not the problem. So I'm glad you came, but I'm still very leery. Thank you.
Yep.
Does the board have any other questions? If not, I want to thank you for making the presentation, and I want to thank you in the audience. Hopefully you, like us, learned something today. Is there a motion to adjourn? All those in favor say aye.
I might stay and maybe answer some questions from the audience.
I have no problem if the board does not mind.
Yeah, I think that's great. Thank you, Mike.
I don't want to say it.